Welcome back to the deep dive. We have got, a pretty heavy one today.
We really do.
Usually, we're looking at a specific event or a tech trend or maybe a biography of someone famous. But today we are looking at the moment humanity effectively changed species.
I mean, that sounds dramatic, but honestly, it might be an understatement. It's really the single biggest pivot point in our entire history.
We are talking about the first agricultural revolution. And look, before you tune out thinking this is just about farming and tractors and dirt, this is the reason you have a job.
Right.
This is the reason you live in a house with a roof. It's the reason you have a concept of Tuesday or, retirement.
It is the fundamental transition from wandering to waiting, from reacting to the environment to actually controlling it.
Exactly. So we are unpacking a pretty dense source today. It's called Seeds of Civilization, the Global Evolution of Agriculture.
Yeah, it covers the AP Human Geography topic 5.3.
Right. But frankly, it reads more like a biography of the modern world.
It really does.
And our mission today is to figure out how a few scattered groups of people, completely independently, decided to stop chasing their dinner and start building fences.
And how that decision eventually put, a Peruvian potato on an Irish dinner plate.
Yes, exactly. But the key word you just said there is independently.
Yeah, that's the part that usually trips people up.
Because it wasn't just one genius idea that went viral.
Right, it wasn't. And we'll get into that mystery. But I think we need to set the scene first. Because to understand the revolution, you really have to understand the before.
The text describes the pre-agricultural world as nomadic hunter-gatherers. What does life actually look like for these people? I mean, paint me a picture.
Well, it's a life defined by immediate consumption. You're living in these small kinship bands, maybe 20, 30 people max.
So really small groups.
Very small.
Oh.
And you move with the seasons. You follow the herds. The most important thing to grasp here, and the source really stresses this, is that you have zero surplus.
Zero surplus, meaning you just eat what you find today.
Exactly. If you find berries, you feast. If you kill a gazelle, you feast. But if you don't find anything, you starve.
There's no pantry.
Right. There's no saving for a rainy day because you can't carry a pantry on your back while you're hiking across the tundra. You are perpetually on the absolute edge of survival.
So high risk, high mobility.
Yes.
And then around 10,000 BCE, something snaps. The text calls this the shift to sedentary agriculture. But it's not like someone just dropped some seeds on the ground and said, well, I live here now.
No, it wasn't an overnight decision at all. It was a very slow, deliberate process of domestication.
And domestication is a technical term we should probably be clear on.
Yeah, because it's not just taming an animal or, watering a wild plant.
Yeah.
It is genetically altering a species through selective breeding.
Explain that a bit more, because I think we assume ancient people were just picking stuff up out of the dirt.
They were engineering.
Yeah.
I mean, you're taking a wild plant, like a wild grass, with these tiny little seeds that fall off the stalk easily, and you're breeding it over generations.
To make it better for us.
Right. To have huge seeds that stay on the stalk until you specifically go and harvest them, you are engineering nature to rely on you.
That is a wild way to put it, that we engineered nature to be needy.
Essentially, yes. A domesticated cow cannot survive in the wild, like its ancestor, the aurochs, could.
Right.
Corn cannot propagate itself without human hands literally shucking it and planting the kernels.
Yeah.
We created this codependency.
And in return, we became needy too.
Exactly. We had to stay put to take care of these things.
Which brings us to the aha moment that I found most baffling in the source material.
The independent innovation.
Yes. You would assume this started in one genius village, maybe somewhere in Iraq, and then they just told their neighbors and it spread outwards. But the source emphasizes independent innovation.
Right. This is basically the concept of convergent evolution, but for culture.
So people figuring out the same thing at the same time.
Yes. You have people in the Middle East, people in China, people in the Andes, and people in Mesoamerica.
And they have no contact.
Yeah. None. No Zoom, no letters, no boats crossing the oceans. Yet, within a relatively narrow window of historical time, they all come to the exact same conclusion.
We should control the food supply.
Exactly.
But why? Was it climate change? Was it population pressure?
The source suggests it's a mix of both. The last ice age ended, the world got warmer and
Wetter.
wetter, yeah. And suddenly, staying in one place became a viable option. You didn't have to constantly move to find food.
Because the food was just growing around you naturally.
Right. And once you could stay, Populations started to grow.
Hmm.
And then you had to farm to feed the extra mouths. It becomes a massive feedback loop.
And that feedback loop creates what the text calls the core implications of sedentary life. This is really the so what section of our deep dive.
Yeah, the big consequences.
Why does it matter that we stopped moving?
Because once you stop moving, you can accumulate stuff.
Stuff. You mean like physical objects?
That means surplus. That is the magic word for civilization. Surplus.
Okay, break that down.
If you're a nomadic hunter, you can't store a dead mammoth for 3 years. It rots. But if you grow wheat, you can dry it. You can store grain in a silo for years.
So you have a backup plan.
You have food security. But
Right.
once you have food security, this is the key. Not everyone has to be a farmer.
This is the labor specialization point.
Exactly. If one farmer can grow enough to feed 5 families, the other 4 families can do other things.
They don't have to worry about their next meal.
Right. So one guy becomes a potter to make jars to store the grain.
Another becomes a soldier to guard the grain.
Yes. Another becomes a priest to pray for more grain.
And someone needs to keep track of who owns which pile of grain, so you invent writing.
Precisely. Writing didn't start as poetry. It started as accounting.
Just keeping ledgers.
Yeah, it started as, I own 3 bushels of barley and you owe me 2. And once you have property disputes, you need laws.
Wow.
You don't get civilization with a capital C, cities, armies, kings, taxes, without that initial pile of grain.
It's a complete domino effect. Domestication leads to surplus. Surplus leads to specialization. Specialization leads to lawyers.
Lawyers, kings, and eventually us sitting here talking into microphones.
Okay, so we know the mechanism. Surplus builds society. Now let's look at the raw materials.
A fun part.
Yeah, the source breaks this down by agricultural hearths.
These are the specific spots where this innovation originally happened.
And I want to tour these hearths because the menu is totally different depending on where you land. And honestly, it explains why our global cuisines look the way they do today.
It really does. Geography dictates the menu, and the menu dictates the culture.
Let's start with a classic one everyone learns in high school, the Fertile Crescent.
Southwest Asia.
Right.
This is the big one for the Western world. You've got the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The climate is Mediterranean, so wet winters, dry summers.
And the native plants here?
They are the absolute superstars of early nutrition, wheat and barley.
The foundation of bread and beer.
Literally. And
Yeah.
importantly, they had the best animals, too.
Oh, right, the livestock.
Yeah, sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs all have wild ancestors in this specific region. This gave the Fertile Crescent a massive head start.
Because they had both the carbs and the muscle power.
Exactly. You can hook an ox to a plow. That changes everything.
Now let's move east to the Indus River Valley over in South Asia.
So, similar latitude.
Which means you still see wheat and barley, right?
You do. It shows that those specific crops travel really well along that east-west axis. But the source notes 2 distinct additions here that are fascinating.
What are they?
Peas and cotton.
Cotton is interesting because you obviously can't eat it.
No, but it shows that agriculture wasn't just about calories early on. It was also about fiber and clothing.
Makes sense.
They also domesticated the chicken and the water buffalo there.
I feel like chickens are the unsung heroes of human history. They just eventually end up everywhere.
They really are. They're compact, highly portable protein.
Okay, let's keep moving east. Southeast Asia. This is a totally different environment from the Middle East.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's tropical, it's wet.
And wheat hates the tropics, right?
Yeah, we hate it. It just rots in that humidity. So here, the great innovation is rice.
Rice.
And specifically root vegetables, too, like taro and yams.
You know, it seems like root vegetables get ignored in history class compared to the big grains, but they are hugely efficient.
Oh, they are caloric bombs. Very efficient, very reliable energy sources.
And for animals in Southeast Asia.
Pigs and chickens again. They do well in forests.
Now, let's cross the ocean. This is where the independent innovation factor really hits home for me. The Americas.
Yes.
The source splits this into Mesoamerica, so Central America, and the Andes in South America.
The New World is fascinating because, in a way, they were playing on hard mode.
Hard mode, how so?
They didn't have the animals.
Oh, right, no oxen.
None. In the Fertile Crescent, you hook an ox to a plow, and you can till a massive field in a single day. In Mesoamerica, they didn't have cows, they didn't have horses, no oxen.
So all the farming labor had to be done by humans.
Every single calorie was physically harder to extract from the earth.
So what were they growing to survive that?
In Mesoamerica, it's the famous trinity. Maize, what we call corn beans, and squash.
And corn is a marvel of genetic engineering, isn't it? I remember reading somewhere that wild corn is basically inedible.
It is arguably the most impressive feat of domestication in human history.
Really?
Yeah, the ancestor of corn is a wild grass called teosinte.
Teosinte.
Right. And it looks absolutely nothing like a corn cob. It has these hard, stony shells, very few kernels.
Sounds terrible to eat.
It is. It took thousands of years of incredibly careful selection to turn that into the maize we know today. It is completely unrecognizable from its ancestor.
That's amazing. And what about down in the Andes?
Potatoes. Hundreds and hundreds of varieties of potatoes.
And for animals.
They have the llama and the alpaca.
Llamas.
Yeah, which are useful for wool, maybe carrying small packs, sure.
Hmm.
But you aren't riding a llama into battle.
Right.
And it certainly isn't pulling a heavy wooden plow through hard, rocky soil.
So, despite having completely different toolkits, no cows, no wheat, no horses, the societies in the Americas still built these massive, complex empires.
Mhm.
The Aztecs, the Incas.
Yeah, that is the huge synthesis point the author makes.
Right.
Geography dictates what you farm, but the result of farming is universal.
Which is complex, stratified societies.
Exactly. Whether that society is fueled by rice or wheat or potatoes, the outcome is always civilization.
Okay, so we have these isolated hearths all over the globe, but obviously they didn't stay isolated forever. I mean, I can buy coffee from the Handies and wheat from the Middle East at the exact same grocery store down the street.
True.
The source talks about patterns of global diffusion. How did the seeds actually travel?
The text outlined three main mechanisms for this. The first is the most straightforward and the most peaceful. It's called extension diffusion.
Is this just neighbors talking to neighbors?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
As populations grew, they naturally expanded outward, trade networks formed, you trade a clay pot for some seeds.
Makes sense.
The idea spreads simply because it's a good idea.
Mm.
You know, hey, if you plant this stuff, you don't starve in the winter.
Hard to argue with not starving.
It's a very compelling sales pitch.
What's the second mechanism?
Migration and conquest. And this one is decidedly less peaceful.
Ah.
When an empire conquers a new region, they bring their food system with them.
So forced farming.
Or colonization, yeah.
Yeah.
Think about the Roman Empire spreading wine and olive oil production all across Europe.
Oh, sure.
They didn't just bring laws and paved roads, they brought their agriculture. They literally terraformed the landscape to look like home.
And the third mechanism?
Technological advancement. This is when we force crops to grow where they naturally shouldn't.
Like growing rice in a desert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Irrigation systems, or terracing mountainsides in the Andes to create flat, arable land.
Oh, right, the steppe farming.
Yeah. And eventually, the plow. These technologies allowed agriculture to break out of its natural ecological niches and spread into entirely new territories.
Places where nature never intended them to go. So it was this slow creep for thousands of years. But then the source hits us with the main event. It calls it the most dramatic and significant instance of agricultural diffusion in history.
The Columbian Exchange.
Yes. This is the biological Big Bang, 15th and 16th centuries.
Europe and the Americas finally collide.
And we usually learn about this in school in terms of explorers, gold, and sadly, disease.
Right.
But the source says the real story, the long-term story, was the food.
It completely changed the biology of the planet. It was a massive biosphere swap. Let's look at what went from the Americas over the Old World first.
Okay. We mentioned maize and potatoes earlier.
The potato is the absolute hero here. It is incredibly nutrient-dense, and more importantly, it grows in cold, damp, rocky soil where wheat often just fails.
So places like Ireland?
Ireland, Germany, Poland, Russia. When the potato arrived in Northern Europe, it completely stabilized their food supply.
The text actually makes a bold claim here. It says the potato caused a population explosion.
It is not an exaggeration at all. The massive population boom in Europe, and parts of Asia too, in the 1700s and 1800s, is directly correlated to the introduction of cheap, reliable calories from the Americas.
Wow.
You could feed way more people on way less land. It literally fueled the huge workforce that would eventually drive the Industrial Revolution.
That is mind-blowing. The Industrial Revolution was powered by Peruvian potatoes.
In a very real way, yes.
Okay, now let's flip it. What went from the old world to the new world?
Wheat, coffee, sugar. But honestly, the biggest impact by far was the livestock.
Right, because remember, the Americas had no horses, no cattle, no pigs.
Suddenly, you drop these grazing animals onto a continent with just endless grass.
The Great Plains.
And they multiplied like crazy. But look at the horse specifically. We have this image in our heads of the Plains Indians, the Sioux,
Yeah.
the Comanche riding horses and hunting buffalo.
Right, it feels totally iconic. It feels like the definition of
It
native.
feels ancient,
Yeah.
but it's not. That lifestyle was a direct product of the Columbian Exchange.
Wait, really?
Yes. The horse allowed those tribes to become nomadic hunters on a scale they could never achieve on foot. It completely revolutionized their culture, their warfare, their economy
Just overnight.
in the span of a single generation, yeah.
So an import from Europe actually created what we think of today as the traditional Native American lifestyle in the plains.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how rapid diffusion completely reshapes a culture.
It shows that culture isn't static. It just adapts to whatever tools or crops suddenly become available.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that gets us to the 1600s or 1700s, but the source brings us all the way to the modern era. We have a section on modern facilitators of agricultural spread.
Because the core problem with food is that it rots.
Right. You can grow a great tomato, but you can't sell it 3 towns over if it just turns to mush on the wagon right there.
And this is where the Industrial Revolution comes back into the story. First, with the railroad.
Speed.
Speed and capacity. You could grow millions of tons of grain in the middle of the North American continent, the Great Plains, and ship it to the coastal cities in days.
This is what turned the U.S. Midwest into the breadbasket of the world.
Exactly.
But grain is dry. It keeps... What about meat? What about fruit?
That is the second major game changer, refrigeration.
The text highlights this as the moment the global market truly opened.
Because before the refrigerated boxcar and the refrigerated cargo ship, distinct regional diets were basically mandatory.
You ate what was around you.
Right. If you lived in Argentina, you ate Argentine beef. If you lived in England, you didn't. Refrigeration completely decoupled consumption from geography.
It's the whole reason I can eat a banana in Canada in February.
Exactly. We take it for granted now, but the ability to move perishable proteins and vitamins across oceans is a technological miracle.
It allowed for global food security, or at least the potential for it.
Yes. And the source notes that even today, we are still seeing diffusion. It's not done.
No, now it's just faster. We're diffusing genetics, we're diffusing specialized fertilizers and hydroponics.
But the foundation remains exactly the same. The crops we are tweaking in high-tech labs today are the exact same crops those ancestors domesticated 10,000 years ago.
That is the part that really sticks with me. We feel so modern with our Instacart and our vertical farming, but we are still basically running the software code written by people in the Fertile Crescent and the Andes.
We really are. We've just optimized the hardware a bit.
The source wraps up by emphasizing the fragility of this whole system, too. Relying on just a few key hearths means our genetic diversity is actually still rooted in these specific ancient places.
That's a great point. If we lose the wild ancestors of these crops in their original hearths, whether due to urbanization or climate change,
Yeah.
we lose the genetic library.
The library we might need to fix future agricultural problems.
Exactly.
So, to recap our mission today, we went from wandering bands to settled villages, all thanks to independent invention.
Right.
We saw how those hearths created distinct cultures based on what they could actually grow. We watched the Columbian Exchange scramble the map, swapping hunger for horses and potatoes.
And finally, industrial tech froze it and shipped it right to our door.
A journey from the first seed to the frozen food aisle.
It really reframes the whole grocery shopping experience, doesn't it?
It does. When you walk down those aisles now, you aren't just looking at food, you are looking at a museum of human innovation.
Yeah.
There's the corn from Mexico sitting right next to the wheat from Iraq, next to the coffee from Ethiopia.
All brought together by trade, technology, and just a whole lot of trial and error.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. The source made it really clear the first agricultural revolution didn't just change what we ate, it changed who we are.
It created the very concept of civilization,
Yeah.
of property, of planning for the future.
It was the software update that allowed humanity to run complex applications.
Exactly.
So if the shift from hunting to farming was that fundamental, and we are currently living through a massive shift from physical labor to digital and AI labor, are we in the middle of a change that is just as big?
That is the question. We moved from the field to the factory, and now to the neural network.
Are we domesticating something totally new and we just can't see the harvest yet?
The societal structure that comes next might be as different from today as a modern city is from a hunter-gatherer camp.
Something to chew on while you eat your dinner tonight, wherever it came from. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Take care.